Welcome back to Prince of Darkness. Tonight we have 3 chilling true stories that prove the most terrifying monsters don't hide under the bed. They wait just outside your door. Settle in, turn off the lights, and whatever you do, don't look out the window. I am the middle child of 3 boys. Both of my brothers grew up as scouts, with my older brother, Scott, eventually making it all the way to Eagle Scout. For whatever reason, my parents never forced me to join. It was a strange dynamic, especially because I remember being intensely jealous of Scott. But the thing I envied the most were the weekend campouts. The troops would go deep into the wilderness, set up massive fires, and sleep under the stars. My jealousy peaked because I always had to watch him prepare. Before every trip, he would practice setting up his tent in our backyard. Even though I was only about 7 or 8 years old, I was desperate to experience it. So I hatched an idea. We would set up the tent and sleep in the backyard overnight. To my younger self, this was the ultimate adventure. Our childhood home wasn't a standard fenced-in property. We lived in a spacious, sprawling neighborhood where the yards just sort of meshed together. There were no wooden fences to block your view, just large patches of thick trees and dark brush separating the properties. It genuinely felt like the edge of a forest. Since we had a fire pit, my parents played along. They set up a fire and we roasted marshmallows with my 4-year-old little brother. Of course, he was too young to sleep outside, so when it got dark, my parents took him in and told Scott and me it was time to bed. We crawled into our sleeping bags. I was playing Super Mario on my Game Boy SP, soaking in the feeling of finally camping. Eventually, exhaustion set in. I turned off the console and closed my eyes. But I couldn't sleep. The ground was hard, the sleeping bag was uncomfortable, and the sounds of the open neighborhood were unsettling. A long, agonizing amount of time passed before I finally drifted off. When I woke up, the tent was pitch black. I was disoriented for a moment. I looked around, letting my eyes adjust to the faint moonlight bleeding through the thin fabric. That was when I noticed Scott's sleeping bag. It was completely empty. The zipper was closed from the inside. He must have gone back into the house because he couldn't get comfortable. Suddenly, the reality of being alone in the backyard hit me. Panic bubbled in my chest. I decided to make a run for the back door. I unzipped the flap just a fraction, just enough to peek out and make sure the coast was clear. It wasn't. Sitting in one of the lawn chairs, directly next to the dead ashes of the fire pit, was a man. It wasn't Scott, it wasn't my dad. It was a grown, strange man. He was facing the tent, sitting perfectly still in the dark. I gasped, violently pulled the zipper shut, and scrambled backward into my sleeping bag as if a thin layer of nylon could protect me. I lay there, completely paralyzed. The tent was dead silent. I wanted to scream for my dad, but fear had gripped my throat. Then, I heard the lawn chair shift. The dry grass crunched under the weight of heavy footsteps. I prayed he was walking away, but the footsteps grew louder, closer. Suddenly, a massive shadow fell over the side of the tent, completely blocking out the moonlight. He was standing right outside. I held my breath, hoping that if I stayed perfectly still, he would think the tent was empty. Then, the metallic teeth of the zipper began to move. Zzzt. just a few inches. Very, very slowly. It was a small opening, but it was enough. I couldn't help myself. I turned my head toward the bottom of the door. Pressed against the small gap in the fabric was a single, wide eye. I could see the white of it gleaming in the dark, staring directly at me. I was so terrified I couldn't even draw breath to scream. For 5 agonizing seconds, we just stared at each other. Then, the skin around the eye crinkled. The man was smiling. The zipper began to drag down another inch. That was when my voice finally came back. I let out a blood-curdling scream, kicking wildly out of my sleeping bag and crashing into the tent poles. The moment I screamed, the footsteps took off, sprinting heavily across the grass. A second later, our back porch lights snapped on. My dad burst out the back door, yelling at the top of his lungs. He charged toward the fire pit, but by the time he reached the tent, the man had vanished into the tree line. The police were called, the yard was searched, and I slept in my parents' bed, emotionally shattered. But that is not where this nightmare ends. About a month later, things had finally started to feel normal again. I attended a Catholic school, and during lunch, we had recess in a large concrete schoolyard. The far end of the yard was bordered by a chain-link fence that looked out onto a public sidewalk. I was playing a game with some kids, and I had to run and touch the fence to be safe. As my hands hit the chain link, a voice spoke from the other side. "Hey!" I turned around. A man was standing on the sidewalk, looking down at me. He asked for directions to a street I didn't know. Remembering the rules about strangers, I stepped back and said, "I don't know." The man tilted his head. "Your name's Chris, right?" My heart plummeted into my stomach. The look on his face, the sound of his voice, it triggered a primal alarm in my brain. I lied and shook my head no. The man smiled, the exact same terrifying, crinkled smile I couldn't see in the dark but knew entirely too well. "You don't remember me, do you?" he whispered. I turned and bolted toward the recess chaperones, screaming and pointing at the fence. But by the time they looked, the sidewalk was empty. The school went into lockdown, my parents were called, and I was taken home immediately. We almost moved out of our beautiful neighborhood because the paranoia was so suffocating. To this day, my chest tightens when I think about that night. If my dad hadn't left the porch light switch right by the door, if I hadn't screamed when I did, I might not be alive today. And the thought that haunts me the most is wondering if that man ever found another tent with a kid who didn't wake up in time. I grew up in Salem, Oregon. When I turned 21, I finally saved up enough to buy my first house, located about 50 miles outside the city limits. Because I was on a tight budget, I spent a lot of time scouring Facebook Marketplace to furnish the place. Since I drove a Ford Raptor, hauling large furniture was pretty easy. One afternoon, I found a listing that looked like a digital yard sale. 2 items immediately caught my eye: a pristine, cream-colored sectional couch and a Cannondale mountain bike. Both were listed for suspiciously low prices. I messaged the seller. His responses were short, blunt, and surprisingly agreeable. He even knocked the price down further and told me I could come pick everything up that same evening. During the summer in Oregon, the days are long, so I knew I would have plenty of daylight left. I plugged the address into my GPS and realized the house was located right on the coast. Checking the satellite view, I saw a massive property. It had a long, private driveway cutting through the woods, leading to a huge house whose backyard ended in a literal cliff drop-off into the Pacific Ocean. No wonder they were selling things so cheap, I thought. With a mansion like that, they probably just wanted the old stuff gone. The drive was beautiful. The closer I got to the coast, the more isolated and expensive the properties became. The road was lined with dense, dark woods, broken only by the occasional hidden driveway. Finally, my GPS told me to turn. I pulled onto a dirt road flanked by towering trees. It was long and slightly inclined. When I reached the top of the hill, the trees broke, revealing a massive millionaire-style clearing. But something felt instantly wrong. Parked in front of this breathtaking mansion was a beat-up, ancient Mercury sedan. It looked like it belonged in a junkyard, not a coastal estate. I parked my truck and walked up to the grand front door. Stuck directly at eye level was a bright yellow post-it note. It read in messy handwriting, "Doorbell broken, please use back door." It struck me as odd. Why not just ask me to knock? But I didn't want to be rude. I pulled out my phone and messaged the seller that I was heading around back. As I walked along the side of the house, I glanced at the windows. Every single blind was pulled completely shut. I reached the backyard, and the view was absolutely staggering. The lawn rolled smoothly out towards the edge of the cliff, overlooking the vast, dark expanse of the ocean. I walked up the wooden steps of the back deck to the sliding glass door. Just like the front, the blinds on the glass door were drawn tight. I knocked loudly on the glass. I waited a full minute. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. I checked my phone. The message was delivered, but left unread. Figuring the guy was maybe in the shower or moving the couch, I decided to sit on one of the patio chairs. I spun it around to face the ocean and just took in the sunset, daydreaming about affording a place like this one day. After 5 minutes of silence, I got up. I figured I would walk down to the cliff's edge to snap a quick picture of the view before leaving. I walked down the freshly cut grass, snapped my photo, and turned around to head back up to the house. I took exactly 3 steps before I froze. Every single blind on the back of the house was now open, and standing behind every single window was a person. They weren't moving. They were standing as still as statues, staring directly out at me. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing. Was it a prank? Were they mannequins? I took one cautious step forward, squinting. And that is when the blood drained from my face. They weren't mannequins, and they weren't just staring. Every single face in those windows was stretching into a wide, unnatural smile. A wave of pure, unfiltered terror hit me. "Nope, I'm done," I muttered out loud. I broke into a jog, sprinting around the side of the house. As I passed the side window, the one that had been tightly shut when I first arrived, the blind was now raised. Another person was standing there in the shadows, smiling. I reached my truck, practically tearing the door handle off. I threw it in reverse and slammed the gas, backing all the way down the dirt driveway. Regrettably, right before I disappeared into the tree line, I looked back at the house. The front door was now wide open. A man was standing on the front porch, his hands casually stuffed in his pockets, watching me leave. I sped down the coastal road until I found the nearest neighboring house, almost a mile away. I banged on their door until an older man answered. Breathless, I explained the bizarre nightmare I had just escaped and asked if he knew what was going on next door. The neighbor looked confused and deeply alarmed. He told me he was close friends with the owner. He pulled out his phone and called him on the spot. "Hey Jim, did you invite someone over to buy furniture? They're saying you pulled some kind of sick prank with people standing in your windows." I could hear the owner's voice crackle through the speaker. "What are you talking about? I've been out of state all week. The house is empty." My stomach twisted into a knot. I took the phone and described the Facebook ad, the beat-up sedan, the note on the door, and the smiling people. The owner begged me to give my statement to the police, took my number, and hung up. I drove home, locking every door behind me. Later that night, the owner called me back. He asked for the link to the Facebook listing, but when I checked, the ad was gone. The profile had been completely wiped blank. He told me the police had just cleared the house. They found no stolen items. The beat-up sedan was gone. But what they did find was chilling. Every blind in the house had been drawn shut again, and all 3 exterior doors had been left wide open. To this day, the image of those smiling faces keeps me awake. I still don't know who they were or what they were planning, but I constantly ask myself, why did that note explicitly direct me to the backyard? And what would have happened if I had tried to open that sliding glass door? I live with my parents in Murraysville, Pennsylvania. One weekend, they went out of town, leaving me the house. Since we have a pool house and a large in-ground pool, I decided to take advantage of the empty house and throw a small late-night pool party for my friends. Our backyard is extremely private. Past the pool patio, there is a stretch of grass and then dense, thick woods. The tree line stretches back for at least half a mile before hitting another property. There are no trails, no public access, and absolutely no reason for anyone to be back there. It was Saturday afternoon and the sky was overcast. I was out on the patio unfolding tables for drinks and setting up the speakers. The wind was completely dead, leaving the yard perfectly quiet. As I bent down to adjust a table leg, I heard a cough. It came directly from the woods. It wasn't an animal. It was the distinct, slow, throat-clearing sound of a grown man. And it wasn't deep in the forest. It came from just inside the tree line, close enough that whoever made it had a clear, unobstructed view of me. I froze, my hands still gripping the plastic table. I stared into the dark cluster of trees. "Who is that?" I called out. Silence. No footsteps. No rustling leaves. Nothing snapping underfoot to indicate someone walking away. That was what made it so terrifying. If it was a lost hiker, they would have answered or kept moving. This person was just standing there, perfectly still, watching me. The feeling of being prey washed over me. I quickly grabbed the rest of the supplies, went inside, and locked the door. I called my best friend, Mark, and asked him to come over early, though I left out the part about the cough so I wouldn't sound paranoid. By 8 p.m., the party was in full swing. We had about 20 people over. The music was loud, the patio lights were bright, and with so many people around, the creepy feeling from the woods entirely faded. Around 1 a.m., the last of my friends finally headed home. The house was dead quiet again. I was exhausted, so I decided to leave the cleanup for the morning. I did one final slow sweep of the backyard. The water in the pool was glassy and still. The woods were dark and silent. I slid the heavy glass door shut, locked it securely, and went upstairs to my bedroom. I lay in bed, scrolling on my phone in the dark, trying to wind down. About an hour passed. I was just drifting off to sleep when a sound shattered the quiet. Splash! My eyes snapped open. It wasn't the sound of a stray branch falling into the water. It was the heavy, plunging sound of a human body jumping into the deep end. I held my breath, listening into the dark. A few seconds later, the rhythmic sound of swimming echoed up to my window. Stroke, splash, stroke, splash. My first rational thought was that a drunken friend had stayed behind as a joke. I checked the time. 2:15 a.m. I got out of bed and crept slowly to my window, which overlooked the pool. I kept my lights off so I wouldn't be seen. I pressed my face against the cold glass and looked down. Illuminated by the underwater pool lights, a man was swimming calmly from the deep end to the shallow end. I squinted, trying to recognize the back of his head. As he reached the stairs, he turned around, treading water. The glowing blue light caught his face. I had never seen him in my life. Panic surged through me. I pushed the window open a crack and yelled, "Who is that?" The swimming stopped instantly. The man didn't flinch. He didn't act startled. He just slowly tilted his head back and stared directly up at my dark window. For a terrifying moment, he just floated there, holding eye contact. Then he waded over to the stairs and climbed out. He was incredibly tall, wearing heavy clothes that clung to his dripping frame. I expected him to sprint into the woods. Instead, he turned toward the house. He didn't run. He walked with a fast, determined, almost militaristic march directly toward the backsliding door. "Hey, get out of here!" I screamed. He ignored me completely. He stepped onto the patio, disappearing from my line of sight beneath the overhang. A second later, I heard the heavy metallic sliding sound of the back door opening. I knew I had locked it. I vividly remembered turning the latch, but it was sliding open. I threw myself away from the window, ran to my bedroom door and locked it. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely unlock my phone. I dialed 911, bringing the phone to my ear as I backed into the darkest corner of the room. Then, I heard the footsteps. Squelch, squeak. Slow, wet footsteps on the hardwood floor downstairs. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't opening drawers or looking for things to steal. The footsteps moved with horrifying purpose, directly toward the staircase. Creak. He was on the first step. I whispered frantically to the 911 operator, giving my address and telling her a man was inside the house. Creak. He was halfway up the stairs. I set the phone down on the carpet, putting it on speaker so the operator could hear. The footsteps reached the second-floor landing. The floorboards outside my room groaned. He stopped directly outside my bedroom door. In the dead silence of the house, I could hear the sound of pool water dripping off his clothes and hitting the floor. Drip, drip, drip. Then the brass doorknob slowly began to turn. It hit the lock and stopped. He twisted it again, harder, then a third time, violently rattling the door and its frame. I covered my mouth to muffle my breathing. There was a long, agonizing pause. Then, he knocked. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the wood. Tap, tap, tap. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I picked up the phone and yelled, "I am on the phone with the police! They are pulling up right now!" Silence fell over the hallway. 5 seconds passed, 10 seconds. Then, a deep, incredibly calm voice spoke from just inches away through the wood of the door. "It's me. Open the door." A chill went down my spine. It was the voice of a grown man, entirely devoid of panic or emotion. "I don't know you! Leave!" I screamed back. There was another suffocating silence. Finally, the wet footsteps turned away. I listened as he walked quickly down the hall, descended the stairs, and pulled the front door open. The heavy slam of the door shook the walls. I stayed pressed against the corner of my room until I saw the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers illuminate my window. When the officers escorted me downstairs, the nightmare became entirely real. There was a thick, soaking wet trail of footprints leading from the backsliding door straight up the stairs and ending in a large puddle directly outside my bedroom door. After clearing the property, the police found no sign of forced entry. I have no idea how he unlocked the sliding door. The only logical explanation is that he slipped into the house during the chaos of the party, unlocked the door, and slipped back out into the woods to wait for everyone to leave. I am completely convinced that the cough I heard from the tree line that afternoon was him. He had been standing in the shadows, watching me set up, waiting for the sun to go down. I don't know who he was or what his motive was. All I know is that if I hadn't heard that splash, if I hadn't locked my bedroom door, I wouldn't be here to tell this story today. Thank you for tuning in to Prince of Darkness. If these stories made you double-check your locks tonight, leave a like and subscribe.
Prince of Darkness.